She was just a woman leaving the store, groceries in one hand, car keys in the other, her second trimester belly gently rounding beneath a faded hoodie. The sky was quiet. The receipt was still warm in her bag. It should have been the kind of day you forget, the kind that disappears into the blur of errands and soft music on the radio. But for Angela Morris, it would be the day her skin color was treated as probable cause, and the day the nation would quietly witness the price of mistaken identity. They told her to get on the ground. She said she was pregnant. They told her again. She asked why. And before her breath could finish forming the sentence, she felt the pavement kiss her cheek. Her body, the same one carrying a child, slammed and pinned beneath the weight of two uniforms who hadn't asked her name. They didn't ask what was in the bag. They didn't check the receipt. The algorithm in their minds ran too fast. Black, hoodie, alone, suspect. Someone recorded, someone shouted, someone cried, but nothing stopped what happened next. She didn't scream. She didn't resist. She simply whispered through gritted teeth and rising fear, "Please call my husband." One of them scoffed. "He's a lawyer?" The officer chuckled without looking up. She tried to say more. "He's the director of—" But they didn't let her finish. Because in their world, that didn't matter. Not in the parking lot, not in a neighborhood where the myth of safety had always been conditional. In the world they thought they knew, she was just another problem to neutralize. And that's exactly what they tried to do, until the phone began to ring. What they didn't know, what they never stopped to imagine, was that the man on the other end of that missed call wasn't just any husband. He was the newly appointed director of the FBI. A man whose job was to investigate misconduct like this. A man whose silence, after that night, would not be an option. But this is not a story about privilege. It's about assumption. It's about what happens when authority is used without accountability, when power loses patience, and when a person's dignity is dismissed before their identity is even heard. It's a reminder that viral moments aren't born from sensationalism. They're born from injustice captured in real time. This is not fiction. This is not an episode of a legal drama or a trending true crime podcast. This is America. This is now. And this is the story of how one woman's quiet strength, one man's principled restraint, and one act of prejudice too careless to conceal lit the match to a reckoning we can no longer delay. Angela Morris woke up that morning like any other weekday, before the sun, before the kids stirred, before her husband's second alarm. She poured a cup of coffee that had gone cold before she even took a sip, packed 2 school lunches, and kissed her children goodbye as they ran toward the bus stop. There was nothing extraordinary in the air, nothing that hinted that her name would be trending on social media by sunset. As she drove to the store, her mind was elsewhere. Lesson plans, pediatric appointments, the gentle flutters in her belly reminding her that motherhood was beginning all over again. She wore what she always wore: comfortable shoes, yoga pants, a gray hoodie with the school mascot on the back. No jewelry, no makeup. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She was just trying to make it through the day. At the grocery store, she moved through aisles like a practiced ritual: diapers, wipes, almond milk, prenatal vitamins. She paid in full, nodded politely to the cashier, and walked toward her car. Behind her, a store employee hesitated. Something about Angela's appearance didn't sit right. Maybe it was the hoodie. Maybe it was the bag that looked too full. Maybe it was just the way unconscious bias can whisper into action before reason has a chance to respond. And so a call was made. A woman matching a vague description, possibly shoplifting, headed for the parking lot. When Officers Keene and Blake received the dispatch, they didn't question it. They saw the black woman alone beside a silver Honda Civic, unlocking the back door to place her items inside. No raised voices, no hurried movement, just groceries and a quiet sigh. But to them, this was the suspicious activity the call described. They pulled in fast, stepped out harder. Guns stayed holstered, but their voices were sharp. clipped, commanding. "Ma'am, we need you to stop and sit on the curb." Angela looked up, startled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, the receipt still in her hand. "Just do as you're told," one of them snapped. The other moved closer. Angela, confused but composed, said she was pregnant and preferred to stand. "I'm not resisting. I just don't understand why I'm being stopped." The words were calm, measured, the way black women are taught to speak in moments like these, when tone can be mistaken for threat, and dignity can become defiance in a second. But the officers didn't hear her tone. They only saw her stance. And when she hesitated, just for a beat, Keene made the first move. Hands on her shoulder, a turn, a shove. Angela's world tilted. The ground hit her before she could brace herself. Her elbow scraped concrete. Her unborn child kicked. A bystander gasped. Another lifted a phone. "She didn't do anything!" someone yelled. Blake reached for cuffs while Angela's voice broke. "I'm pregnant. I'm not resisting. Please stop." But the officers weren't listening to her. They were listening to their own urgency, their own training, their own fears. And those fears had long been calibrated by years of implicit bias and media-fed suspicion. They didn't. Instead, Officer Blake muttered, "If he's so important, why isn't he here?" The other scoffed, another one playing the victim. A nearby shopper yelled again, "I saw her pay! She didn't take anything!" But this was no longer about theft. It never really was. It was about control, containment, de-escalation through domination. And to Angela, it became frighteningly clear that they weren't interested in questions, only conclusions. It was not lost on her that her husband was the FBI director, but she had also lived long enough to know what that did, and did not, protect her from. David had warned her early in their marriage, "Don't ever assume they'll know who you are. They'll only see what they want to see." She used to think he was being overly cautious. Now, with her cheek pressed against stained asphalt, she knew he was being realistic. At FBI headquarters, David was pacing. Angela never missed his midday call. When she didn't answer the first time, he let it slide. The second time, he called again. By the third, he sent a text. No reply. That was unlike her. He felt it in his gut. Something wasn't right. Back at the scene, an elderly woman stepped forward, holding up her phone with trembling hands. "This is wrong," she said, showing video footage to a police sergeant who had just arrived. The footage was short but clear. Angela is buying baby formula. Angela thanked the cashier. Angela is walking to her car. The sergeant reviewed it in silence. His face tightened. He asked, "Who called this in?" The answer came. "Store manager. Said she looked suspicious." "Did anyone verify the theft?" "No, sir, not yet." The sergeant walked over to the two officers. "Get her up, now!" They hesitated. "Sir, she was resisting, I said get her up." As they lifted her, Angela winced. Her right wrist was swollen. Her face was scratched. But what cut deeper was the knowledge that no one had listened. Not until it became undeniable. Not until the evidence was handed over in pixels and silence. David, by now, had traced Angela's last known location using shared device data. The grocery store. He called the store manager. No answer. He called the precinct. No clear records. Finally, someone at headquarters approached him, visibly shaken. "Sir, there was an incident. A black female was detained outside a store. Unconfirmed ID, but she matches Mrs. Morris's description." He didn't shout, he didn't panic, he simply said, "Where is she now?" and left the room. Angela sat in the back of the patrol car, uncuffed now, offered water she did not drink. A different officer, female, younger, more cautious, asked gently, "Is there someone we should call for you?" Angela nodded. "My husband, David Morris." She hesitated. "He's the director of the FBI." The young officer blinked. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Angela repeated it. Clear. unapologetic. The officer walked away, fumbling for her phone. The sergeant beside her glanced at the name, turned pale, and mouthed a quiet curse under his breath. Because in that instant the narrative shifted. The suspect had a name, a story, a connection that demanded accountability. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't have expected, was that David wasn't coming for revenge. He was coming for answers. Not to protect power, but to expose the absence of it. Because Angela, his wife, was not an exception. She was the rule that too many Americans lived by. That blackness in public could be met with suspicion and force before words. And so when David arrived, not with cameras, not with a press team, but with a face carved in quiet fury, he did not speak first. He looked at the officers, at the scratches on his wife's arms. The video played back to him without commentary, and then finally he said, "We'll handle this properly, internally, legally, transparently." Angela leaned into him, not to collapse, but to be seen. And for the first time that day, someone truly did. Angela had been here before, pulled over for driving too slow in the suburbs, followed by store clerks who smiled through suspicion, but never like this. This was different. As the officers closed in, she felt her heart slow down, not speed up. She heard the sharpness in their tone, read the certainty in their body language. Her training kicked in. Stay calm. No sudden moves, no questions that sound like protest. Her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm pregnant. I haven't done anything." But inside, she was screaming. They didn't check the bag in her hand. They didn't ask to see a receipt. They didn't even look in the cart. What they saw was skin color, clothing, posture, an algorithm of prejudice they called suspicion. Officer Blake sneered without looking her in the eyes. "Don't think you're any different from the others." The phrase landed like a slap. The others, that invisible group black people are always filed into before facts can catch up. Angela reached slowly for her phone, her fingers trembling not from guilt, but from years of practiced fear. "I need to call my husband," she said. But as soon as the screen lit up with David's name, a boot came down. The device cracked against the concrete, her lifeline severed with one motion. "That's resisting," said Officer Keene. "Now we've got a problem." From across the sidewalk, a child's voice pierced the tension. A young white girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing. "Mom, why are they hitting that lady?" The mother said nothing. She couldn't. She was frozen, not from danger, but from shame, the kind that burns deeper than fear. Officer Blake barked louder now, needing control as attention grew. "You are resisting lawful commands," he shouted, half to Angela, half to the cameras now emerging from nearby phones. "You will be charged if you don't comply." Angela's knees were scraped. Her palms bled from trying to brace the fall. She couldn't respond fast enough, not for their standards. Her eyes filled, not from physical pain, but a deeper kind of fracture. She wasn't crying for herself. She was crying because she knew the rules. She followed everyone. Still, here she was. Her voice broke open, trembling and sharp. "I taught your children." Her breath caught in her chest. "I've been in your schools, your libraries. I gave everything to this place." But the badges didn't blink. They didn't recognize her. A man from the crowd stepped forward. "She paid for her things," he said, waving the receipt he had picked up from the wind. "I saw it myself." He handed it over, expecting a pause, some hesitation, but there was none. The officers didn't take it. They didn't even glance. Authority, once in motion, does not break rhythm for facts. Blood began to drip down Angela's forehead, a scrape from the pavement. The baby kicked hard, so hard she gasped. Her whole torso pulsed with sharp pain, her body confused by the violence it was told to endure quietly. Her lips trembled, her breath caught, the only thought running through her mind, "Protect the baby, protect the baby." As they twisted her wrists behind her back, a name slipped from her mouth, not to intimidate, not as a weapon, but as a cry of identity. "Call my husband, David Morris." A pause. "He's the director of the FBI." It wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. A plea to be seen as human, finally. A car screeched nearby. A black sedan. A plainclothes officer stepped out, older, ranking. His eyes swept the scene, then stopped. He knew her face. His mouth opened, but no words came. The color drained from his cheeks. In one breath, the incident changed, not in fact, but in fear of consequences. The senior officer, Lieutenant Harlan, stood motionless. His eyes were fixed on Angela's face, then on the blood, the tight plastic zip ties, the bruises forming too quickly on her exposed wrists. He had seen this before. Complaints, lawsuits, press coverage, but never this close, never involving someone whose name was one step away from a national headline. The moment he heard David Morris, the title director of the FBI, rang in his ears, not as a title, but as a ticking clock. He took one step forward and spoke without looking at Blake or Keene. "Uncuff her. Now." There was a beat of silence. Blake hesitated, confused. "Sir, we followed protocol. She was uncooperative." "I said now." The tone left no room for rebuttal. The plastic ties were cut. Angela's arms dropped limply to her side, but she didn't stand. She stayed on the pavement, catching her breath. No apology was offered. People around the scene were filming, but their silence was heavier than the phones they held. They had all seen it unfold in real time, every decision, every mistake, every unnecessary ounce of force. The reveal of her husband's identity hadn't undone the abuse. It had merely changed how others perceived its cost. Angela sat up slowly. Her hoodie was torn. Her belly twitched as the baby moved, reacting to adrenaline like a silent protest from within. Harlan bent down and extended a hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and asked calmly, "Would you be here if I weren't married to him?" He said nothing. A paramedic team arrived minutes later. They were gentle, respectful, visibly shaken. One of them asked if she needed a stretcher. She declined. "I can walk," she said, though her legs were trembling. As they helped her to her feet, someone from the crowd stepped forward. A young man, college-aged, who'd been recording everything from the moment she walked out of the store. "I've got the whole thing," he said. "It's already online." She nodded. "Keep it up." Back at the precinct, Lieutenant Harlan ordered a full internal review. Privately, he made 3 phone calls, to his chief, to legal counsel, and finally to a quiet line he reserved for political emergencies. What unnerved him more than the cameras, more than the civil rights implications, was this. Angela had done nothing wrong, and every second of it had been documented. He couldn't bury this. No one could. Meanwhile, Angela sat in the back of an ambulance, her hands wrapped in gauze, her phone finally returned to her, cracked, barely functional. She stared at it, then opened the last unread message from David. "Are you okay? Haven't heard from you." Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "I'm alive. Barely." That evening, the footage had reached national outlets. News tickers across the country ran the headline, "Black woman assaulted by police. Husband is FBI director." But for Angela, it wasn't the headline that mattered. It was the hundreds of messages from other women, Black, Latina, immigrant, poor, saying, "This happened to me too." No one listened. David arrived at the hospital just before midnight. He didn't bring security. He didn't bring a team, just himself. He walked into her room, saw the bandages, the bruises, the sterile beeping of machines. But it was her eyes that gutted him. Not rage, not pain, but that deep, unspeakable weariness. The kind that comes when dignity has been tested again and again. He reached for her hand, wrapped it gently in his, and for the first time that day, she closed her eyes and let her shoulders fall. But neither of them slept. Because they both knew what came next wasn't justice. It was proof. It was hearings, investigations, public opinion, political maneuvering, and beneath it all, a question neither could answer fully. If she weren't his wife, would she still be alive? The security cameras from the parking lot were pulled. Not just one, but 4 angles. Body cam footage was requested. Cell phone clips from witnesses, uploaded across TikTok, Facebook, and even Reddit, were collated. A single frame began to form. A woman who had not raised her voice, not run, not lied. And yet she was handled as if a threat lived in her breath. Angela did not press charges against the 2 officers directly. She filed a formal civil suit against the police department, the city, and its training division. The claim was deliberate, worded with precision. For operating, sustaining, and protecting a law enforcement culture where unconscious bias results in predictable harm to innocent civilians, especially women of color. She didn't name names. She named a system. This was not a woman demanding punishment. This was a woman demanding recognition. Angela did not go on television. She declined interviews. She turned down invitations from national talk shows, feature segments, and exposés. Instead, she accepted one invitation: to appear before the local legislative council during their police budget hearings. A chamber room with no audience clapping. Just 15 lawmakers, 2 microphones, and the silence that only gravity can hold. She wore gray. Her hair was tied back. No makeup, no script. She walked to the podium and placed a photograph down in front of her. It showed a classroom, 23 third graders, some smiling, some distracted, all of them children of color. "These are my students," she said, "and I want you to know what happens when they're told, without words, that their skin makes them suspicious." She didn't speak about herself until minute 5. She spoke instead of Marcus, age 9, labeled aggressive because he tapped his foot too fast. Of Lily, suspended because she told a teacher to stop yelling. Of the parent who once asked her quietly, "What do I tell my son when he sees police and flinches?" Then she told the story. She told it not like a victim. She told it like a teacher, a narrator, a witness. I was stopped without question. I was pinned without resistance. I was presumed guilty before anyone asked me a single thing. And I'm standing here not because my husband holds federal office, but because my child is still alive. Others don't get that chance. She paused. Then she looked directly into the eyes of the council. What will you do when it's your child face down on the sidewalk, screaming for breath, while their receipt flies into the gutter? There was no cough, no shifting papers. No one dared look at their phones. In the back of the room, David stood, not as director, but as a man who could no longer protect his wife with rank. His eyes were tired, not from work, from restraint. Angela looked toward him, just once, and continued. "You have officers with badges, you have systems with manuals, but do you have people with judgment? Because I watch the training videos too, I teach from them, but training doesn't stop harm when bias remains unchecked." Her final line didn't shake. It struck. This wasn't a bad day. This was a system working exactly as designed. And then she stepped down. The room didn't clap. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to reckon. Angela's testimony didn't trend on social media. It didn't get millions of likes. But it did something more dangerous. It got written into the record. The city clerk transcribed every word. Her voice, steady, factual, measured, was etched into public governance. It was now legally archived, not as outrage, but as evidence. Behind the scenes, the response began not with apologies, but with avoidance. A city spokesperson issued a brief statement. "We take allegations seriously and support a full review." But Angela wasn't interested in their seriousness. She wanted transparency. So she made her next move. Through her attorney, a former civil rights scholar, Angela filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Not for emails, for training curricula. She demanded to see the exact bias prevention training given to officers Blake and Keene. The results shocked even her. 2 PowerPoint presentations from 3 years ago, one 36 minutes long, the other marked optional. No assessments, No follow-up. No embedded scenarios involving black female civilians. Nothing on interacting with pregnant individuals. Angela brought those files to the next council hearing. She laid them out on the table. "This is what you call training," she said. "You're not preparing officers to avoid bias. You're preparing them to defend it." The room shifted again. A council member nodded slowly, then leaned toward his mic. "We'll reopen the committee for curriculum overhaul." David watched from the hallway. He still hadn't spoken publicly about Angela's lawsuit, and he wouldn't. His silence was not absence, it was discipline. He didn't want to be the story. Angela was leading this one. She was rewriting how justice responds, when it's not about rage, but redirection. Behind closed doors, city lawyers offered a settlement. High 6 figures, a confidentiality clause, no admission of wrongdoing. Angela read it quietly, then slid it back. "I don't need money. I need your oath to reform." The room went cold. One official asked, "What would that even look like?" She answered without hesitation. "Mandatory bias evaluation, yearly, not just once. Training modules co-developed by educators, and live scenario drills are judged by community panels. Not all officers need to be fired, but they all need to be retrained, thoroughly, personally. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a condition." Within a week, the city issued a public commitment to review the entire training division under civilian oversight. Angela had cracked the one thing most cases couldn't: institutional denial. As word spread, other cities took notice. Angela's testimony was requested by policy groups. Her educational framework on implicit bias was adapted into a pilot program in 3 school districts. Civil liberties organizations began citing her approach: dignity-based, evidence-first, future-facing. Her lawsuit, still pending, has now become a legal template for others pursuing systemic accountability, not just compensation. Meanwhile, the officers involved remained on administrative leave. They weren't shielded, but they weren't sacrificed either. Angela refused to let the city make them scapegoats. "This isn't just about what they did," she told a local journalist. "It's about what they were taught to do and what no one stopped them from becoming." In private moments, David would still ask her, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" And every time she'd answer the same way: "I want the next woman to be able to walk to her car without rehearsing how to survive." She returned to her classroom one morning with a new assignment pinned to the board. The heading read, "What does it mean to be believed?" The children wrote their answers, some literal, some profound. One said, "It means people listen the first time." The twist had never been about power. It was about making truth undeniable, so the system could no longer pretend not to see. Angela didn't walk away a hero. She walked away tired, not defeated, but weathered. Change doesn't come with applause, it comes in audits, in rewritten policies, in retraining manuals with her words printed beside legal definitions. Her story had shaken the system not because she demanded vengeance, but because she demanded vision. The final hearing of the internal review closed with one line from the board. A systemic lapse occurred. Cold, formal, but for once, honest. Behind that phrasing were over 120 pages of findings, including the recommendation for full civilian oversight of future misconduct reviews, enhanced protocols for pregnant detainees, and updated accountability frameworks. Angela never returned to that building. She had learned something deeper, that justice, in its purest form, was never about making headlines or enemies. It was about changing who gets protected by default. She walked away not with a victory in her hands, but with a ripple trailing behind her that would not be silenced. Officer Keene resigned 2 months later. No press release, no admission of guilt. But Angela didn't need it. She wasn't looking for remorse. She was looking for a world where the next Angela wouldn't have to be known to be safe. Officer Blake was reassigned and later placed into a long-term retraining program under civilian guidance. Angela declined to comment. 1 year later, David and Angela welcomed their daughter, Naomi Grace, into a quieter room, one filled with soft music and no sirens. Angela held her close, then whispered something no one else could hear. A promise. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just breathe, finally free of fear. They never moved away. They stayed in the same neighborhood, same school, same grocery store. Because real change doesn't come from escaping. It comes from staying and making things better. Angela's presence became a reminder that justice isn't what happens in courtrooms. It's what happens in classrooms, on sidewalks, in city council chambers, where dignity must be reintroduced as law. David, too, changed. He spoke less publicly but advocated more internally, subtly reshaping FBI policy, pushing for bias research integration into federal training, and advocating for community trust units. But it was Angela who taught him the hardest truth, that silence, even strategic silence, must eventually answer to conscience. Years later, when a journalist asked her if she ever forgave the officers, she paused, not out of bitterness, but out of precision. "Forgiveness isn't the point," she said. "Accountability is." Then she added, "But I hope they became better men. I hope they teach their own sons to stop and ask before they act." The mural on the school wall still stands, her profile, not as a victim, but as a voice. Beneath it, Naomi's tiny handprint was added months later in blue paint. Justice reimagined doesn't mean perfect outcomes. It means we stop accepting predictable harm as inevitable. It means power is no longer measured by rank or uniform, but by the courage to admit wrong, repair harm, and rebuild better. Angela didn't rewrite the law, she rewrote its lens. And through it, millions began to see, not just her pain, but their own reflection. And for the first time, they didn't look away.